there can't be a better day to talk about Sri Aurobindo rather than today being the gold that we have won in Olympics. It's truly a great day to celebrate nationalism, our country, and the pride that we all have been sharing across all multiple platforms today. I welcome you all. Namaskar to everyone. My name is Mohit, and I'm representing City Book Leaders, a knowledge platform that encourages the discussions and conversations around books. And it is our pleasure to have an association with prestigious Central Secretariat Library to initiate this monthly series to build a community of readers with authors, readers, members of the library, and other thought leaders. Just to give you a brief of an introduction of what Central Secretariat Library is, CSL, under the aegis of Ministry of Culture, Government of India, is one of the largest government libraries. Indian and foreign official documents are valuable parts of the core collection. CSL's resources are an amalgamation of number of libraries of pre-independent Indian and many other old institutions such as Imperial Secretariat Library. The main mission of Central Secretariat Library is to perform the function of a secretariat library with its collection of government reports and gazettes, despite the fact that they have other books and other journals as well. Central Secretariat Library caters the need of all the ministries and the departments of the Government of India. Our today's session is totally links up to the common mission of both CSL as well as us as City Book Leaders to spread the joy of reading and also post-reading build social ways to bring like-minded people together as we have all of us come together. While libraries do play a very, very pertinent role, I would now request Shri Parthasarthi Sharma-ji, our esteemed guest, as well as, I must say, our pseudo-host, who is presently the Joint Secretary, Ministry of Culture, to share his views on libraries, reading, and this unique initiative that we have initiated today to begin the session. Before I call him onto this virtual stage, I would also like to briefly introduce all of you to him to all of you. Mr. Sharma is an IAS officer from UP Cadre and is a noted author himself. Has written 3 books translated both in Hindi and English. He has active interest in sports and literature. And I would now request Mr. Sharma to grace this new beginning with his words of wisdom. Parthasarthi Sharma, sir, please.
Let me take the occasion to say that the privilege to invite all of you in this session, including Professor Michel Danino, who is our guest of honor today, and we look forward to listening to him about Aurobindo and the Rebirth of India, and also Professor Sampadananda Mishra ji. The purpose behind or the thought behind this initiative that we have taken is that we believe that in the days to come, with most of the contents being available online, it is for the libraries to reinvent themselves and to become a place of cultural discussion around books rather than only a repository or a storage place of books. And with this thought, we started this initiative of having periodic discussions on various topics connected to books, connected to ideas and conversations with our members and also with people who are not our members. This is the first of the series of such discussions and conversations that we would like the library to have, and we would like more and more people to join. I'm happy to see that we have already 114 people today. That is the brief idea behind why these conversations and why this entire exercise is, and it will go hand in hand with the participation and enthusiasm of the people as they join. Mohit, I'm thankful to CSL and Mohit, City Book Leaders, to do this, and I'm also very, very thankful to Professor Michel Danino and to Sampadananda ji for joining us. And I hand over Mohit to take over the session forward.
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to listen to you, and you're always as inspiring as you can be. A little apology, and I would like to make my correction here that Shri Parthasarthi Sharma ji is an additional secretary. I mentioned it as joint secretary, but he is the additional secretary, Ministry of Culture. I also welcome the entire leadership team of CSL who is here with us today. The director, Shri Manoj Dehuri ji, library information officer, Shri Y.S. Rao ji, Shri M.S. Bish ji, Assistant Library Information Officer Sri Goswamiji, and all the other leadership team that is here from the Central Secretariat Library. Mentioning about today's session, which Partha sir has already given a brief to us. Today's session on Sri Aurobindo is a revolutionary philosopher, literator, and seer. Sri Aurobindo remains one of the brightest minds India has ever had. This book that we are going to discuss today, which is India's Rebirth, edited by our keynote speaker, Professor Michel Danino, captures the evolution of his thought through excerpts from his political articles and speeches, essays, talks, and letters with his disciples, and also his public messages. And it has been presented in a very beautiful style in a chronological way. The book carries a remarkable set of information and beautifully edited description of his talks. It includes his views on many other political leaders, the political situation of the country, both prophetic of the challenges to come, India's way post-independence, and persuaded of a potential to overcome them. Sri Aurobindo's vision of a new India melds the spiritual with the political. And despite being 60 years of his passing, Sri Aurobindo's penetrating insights on issues such as building on India's cultural and spiritual foundations, a national agenda for education, a secular coexistence, and the need to distinguish reason from a blind imitation of the West continue to resonate till today. It is with this thought of his love to the country, it's a must to have a customary sing-a-song in the praise of our motherland, and the one that truly inspired Sri Aurobindo, that is Bankim's Bande Mataram. And for that, we have a young future leader of our country, Yashika Chauhan, who's a 9-year-old learner of Kathak, classical singing, and is a student of class 4 in Delhi's public school at Noida. Here we present this little goddess to praise the goddess Bharat Ma to all of you. Yashika, I now invite you to come and sing the praise to our motherland, Bande Mataram.
Thank you. थैंक यू मोहित अंकल। नमस्कार प्रियजनों, मैं यशिका चौहान वर्ग 4 की छात्रा वंदे मातरम के साथ आप लोगों का अभिनंदन करती हूँ। वंदे मातरम, वंदे मातरम, सुजलाम सुफलाम मलयज शीतलाम सर्वश्यामला मातरम वंदे मातरम। शुभ्रा ज्योत्स्ना पुलकितयामिनीं फुल्लकुसुमिता द्रुमदलशोभिनी सुहासिनी सुमधुरभाषिणी सुखदां बलदां मातरं वन्दे मातरं वन्दे मातरम। धन्यवाद।
Thank you very much, Yashika. It was such a lovely, and there can't be a better way to praise in the glory of our motherland. Thank you very much for joining in. We truly believe that such future leaders of our country will take us ahead. I would now introduce you all to our eminent guests of the session, Professor Michel Danino and Dr. Sampadananda Mishra ji. French-born Michel Danino ji has lived in India since 1977. A student of Indian civilization, he has written on proto-historical India. His book, The Lost River, On the Trail of the Saraswati, and That's How I Know Him. It's a remarkable book. It's a book which every Indian should read, I must say, to know of who we are and the Indian culture. His other book, which is what we are going to discuss today, it has been compiled between 2010 to 2018. Between 2011 and 2014, he was visiting faculty at IIM Ranchi and twice a scholar in residence at IIT Gandhinagar. Since 2011, he has been teaching courses on Indian civilization and Knowledge Systems at IIT Gandhinagar, where he's currently the visiting professor and has been assisting its Archaeological Sciences Center. Michel Danino ji was 2015-18 a member of the Indian Council of Historical Research. He is currently a member of the Research Council for History of Science, Indian National Science Academy, the Central Advisory Board on Culture, Ministry of Culture, Government of India, and the Academic Council of Indic Academy. Sorry. He is also convener of a CBSC Committee for Course Knowledge, Traditions and Practices of India, whose 2-volume textbook he co-edited with Professor Kapil Kapoor, 2013 and 15. In 2017, the Government of India awarded him padamshree for his work on education and culture. Many of Michel Danino's work, research papers, articles, and other writings are available online, the link for which I will share in a while, which is an IIT Gandhinagar link. His other interests include nature conservation, a field in which he is especially active during his stay in India and Nilgiris since 1982. After Michel Danino, I would now request your Dr. Sampadananda Mishra to be introduced. Dr. Mishra is passionate about Sanskrit. He strongly believes that Sanskrit has immense potentiality to elevate the human consciousness to sublime heights. Dr. Mishra has spoken at various conferences, seminars, and literary and religious festivals, both nationally as well as internationally. Apart from Sanskrit, he has spoken and holds considerable authority on the subjects of Indian culture, yoga, and education. In addition, Dr. Mishra, as a devotee of Sri Aurobindo and Mother, is familiar with their writings and feels comfortable in delivering lecture on philosophy and practice of Sri Aurobindo's yoga. The Government of India has conferred the President's Award, Maharishi Bhadrayana Vyas Samman 2011 on Dr. Mishra for his outstanding contribution to Sanskrit. 2014, the Ministry of Culture, Government of India conferred the Senior Fellowship Award to Dr. Mishra, and there are a series of such accolades that Dr. Mishra has been awarded with. Dr. Mishra was also conferred the Pandit Deendayal Upadhyay Recognition of Re-Engineering India 2020 by the Rethink India organization. We at City Book Leaders are truly privileged to have him as our mentor in taking the literary discussions of Sanskrit and building the appreciation of this language across many of our patrons. I would now request Professor Michel Danino to deliver his keynote address and take us through the illustrious life of Sri Aurobindo. Over to you, sir.
Namaste, and first of all, my gratitude to you, Mohit, and the City Book Leaders organization for inviting me, and the Central Secretariat Library for hosting this event. My thanks to Sri Parthasarathi Singh Sharmaji for joining it, and I am sure that I will have an opportunity to meet sometime and discuss some issues central to the Ministry of Culture and its expanding agenda. I'm stunned by the fact that next year, in 2022, we have a mathematical synchronism of 75 years of Indian independence completed and 150 years of Sri Aurobindo's birth anniversary completed too. And therefore, a number of events have been envisaged this year to celebrate both these very important landmarks. I'm humbled that I have been requested to give this talk on his vision of India's rebirth, and I think we will have an opportunity to better understand what he meant by rebirth. This is actually my whole purpose. Let me perhaps begin by having a very brief retrospective of his career as, like Mohit said, a revolutionary thinker and an active member of the movement in the fight for freedom. He was not an armchair intellectual, and therefore the broad conceptual framework, which I will attempt in a very simple way to convey of his vision of a future India, is not something that evolved out of mere abstract thinking. It was really in the battlefield that it took shape. So I will begin by showing a few simple slides that will perhaps refresh your memories. I'm sure most of you would be already familiar. So this is a simple retrospective of his, what led him to this vision, which we are going to then try to outline. Not more than outline, because it's a vast as well as profound vision, and it would take much more time to explore it substantially. But I will first of all remind you that he was born, of course, in India in 1872, but he did not know India very much in his youth. He had some faint memories of it, but from the age of 7, he was brought up in England, and pretty much apart from his immediate relatives, his brothers, as a matter of fact, pretty much in isolation and cut off from anything Indian. So after very solid grounding in the European classics and classical languages such as Latin and Greek, and also enough grounding in German and Italian, and quite a solid foundation in French, he went to Cambridge, and the story is famous. I will not tell it in detail, but he was successful in passing the ICS exam, which his father wanted him to pass, but found a way to get himself disqualified, as it was not his plan to serve the British administration in India. In fact, his idea for a revolutionary movement that would bring about Indian independence were already taking shape while he was a student at Cambridge. When he came back to India in 1893, and he was in the service of the Maharaja Gaikwad of Baroda, his thoughts crystallized, and almost immediately he wrote a series of rather fiery articles in the Hindu Prakash, which was a daily, completely edited and published by Indian friends, where he already condemned, as he said, our actual enemy, not any force exterior to ourselves, but our own crying weaknesses, our cowardice, our selfishness, our hypocrisy, our purblind sentimentalism. So you can see that he was not mincing his words. In fact, he was asked to stop that series of articles because it was a little too strong for those days, 1893, where the beginnings almost of the Indian National Congress, but which initially was not at all advocating independence, but rather requesting some pretty minor and superficial reforms. So after some time in the service of the Maharaja, and he taught at the Baroda State College, which today, of course, is the MS University in Baroda. He taught and a few other topics, and eventually became the vice principal, even acting principal at some time. Then his ideas took further shape, not only on the movement for liberation of India, but also on the central importance of education in his scheme of things. And this is something we're going to revisit shortly. This is a well-known photo of some of his students around him. They revered him. He was a very unusual teacher. And already he denounced at that time the fundamental and deplorable error by which we in this country have confused education with the acquisition of knowledge. Much as we have lost as a nation, we have always preserved our intellectual alertness, quickness, and originality. But even this last gift is threatened by our university system. And if it goes, it will be the beginning of irretrievable degradation and final extinction. And this is how he was posing the fundamental problems facing India in his time, one after another, aspect after aspect of Indian life, Indian society. Whether the university system improved during his days and after independence is a moot point. We will come back to this a little later. So he was actually drawn into, it's a long story, I will cut it short, into the national education movement, which began officially after a few limited attempts here and there in Bengal under the Bengal National College, and he was specifically asked to come and join as its first principal. So he resigned his position in Baroda and for a much lesser salary migrated to Calcutta, which he was already visiting because he was organizing the secret societies in Calcutta as well as in the Western region. And he was already a close collaborator of Tilak in this work. In addition, he became the unofficial editor of Vande Mataram, which day after day was trying to focus fellow Indians on the urgency of a clear vision for India's independence. And this is the office, in fact, of the journal. And he had this statement in 1906, probably the very first time in India that the goal of independence was so clearly formulated, the attainment of absolute national autonomy. It is this alone that will settle down this movement. Now, absolute national autonomy is the clearest equivalent of independence, a word that they could not, of course, use officially openly. So this was the start of a great influence over the entire movement across India, because Vande Mataram's articles were not only reproduced through other journals, other dailies, other weeklies, other magazines across India, they were also translated into a number of Indian languages and distributed in many ways. And there he also, I will not go into these details because I want to shift to another discussion altogether. He outlined this doctrine of passive resistance. This was in 1907 in a series of major articles where he clearly spelled out the 4 pillars of this movement. Swaraj, number 1, Swadeshi, boycott, of course, of British goods, and this went together with non-cooperation, and finally, national education. He was not perhaps the creator of these 4 concepts. They were already floating around. They were already discussed by a number of freedom fighters, but he was the one who brought them together with this kind of clarity in this doctrine of passive resistance. Let me then show him as the principal of the Bengal National College. This was at a time when he was prosecuted for the first time for sedition by the British for articles in Vande Mataram. And so as not to embarrass the college, he resigned. And the day he resigned, 23rd August 1907, he delivered a very moving speech. We will not have time to read it. It's famous. And you can see him decorated by his own students and teachers about to deliver this speech, where he called upon them to work and suffer and prosper for the sake of India and not for their own personal sakes. And he was acquitted in this first sedition trial because technically there was no official editor for Vande Mataram, so they could not blame those particular articles on him. But this independence was not going to, this release from British persecution was not going to last very long. Here we see him shortly thereafter presiding over the session of the nationalists, as they call themselves, at the Surat Congress, the famous split of the Congress at Surat in 1907. The moderates, the other part of the Congress, called these freedom fighters extremists, and the British, of course, also did, but they called themselves nationalists. And you can see Bal Gangadhar Tilak addressing the session, which is presided over by Sri Aurobindo, who is seated here. So his political career continues and takes more and more importance in the national stream of the movement, not limited to Bengal at all. And we have here the best possible compliment by the British authorities themselves, Lord Minto, who qualifies him as the most dangerous man we have to deal with at present, while Edward Baker said that he attributed the spread of seditious doctrines to him personally in a greater degree than to any other single individual in Bengal or possibly in India. So these are the most eloquent testimonies to his role in the fight for freedom. He was, of course, arrested in the Alipur bomb case. I will not dwell upon this. And this is the jail where he spent a year, almost precisely to the day, from May 1908 to May 1909. And after his release, this is the Uttarpara, famous Uttarpara speech. After his release, then there was a change of tone. There was a change also of dimension to his concern. He was still as determined that India should acquire her independence, but he was looking also beyond India at India's role in the world. And this is what becomes apparent in this speech. He also founded the Karma Yogin. It was a weekly this time, and in English, plus edited at the same time a Bengali weekly, Dharma. And in Karma Yogin, he restated our ideal is that of Swaraj, or absolute autonomy free from foreign control. Again, not using the word independence, but it is clear what he means. And once again, the moderate section of the Congress, which had by now taken control of the Congress, was still very, very far from asserting this objective. Then he abruptly left the political scene in 1910. He said, this is his own statement, that he received an adesh while the Karma Yogin office was about to be raided by the British authorities. He received an adesh to leave immediately to Chandanagar, which he did because he said he was in this habit of obeying certain commands. A lot of spiritual experiences had happened during his 1 year stay in the Alipur jail, which he called the Alipur Ashram, ironically, during his Uttarpara speech. And he left immediately, spent 3 weeks in complete seclusion and meditation in Chandanagar, and then received a second command to go to Pondicherry. So traveling clandestinely through Calcutta, because the British authorities were looking for him, he took a ship and reached Pondicherry on 4th April 1910. So this was the end of his official political career. He still remained in touch fairly actively for some years with his fellow revolutionaries elsewhere in India. And some of them followed him, and you can see them here on this photo, to Pondicherry. He had now a growing emphasis and ultimately exclusive focus on his spiritual experience, spiritual work. It didn't mean, however, that he lost touch with what was happening in India, and we will see that clearly illustrated in a few moments. So what I want now to discuss briefly is his vision of India's rebirth. We have seen his action, or a little bit of it, not much, but what became very clear in his mind was that there was a need for the nation as a whole to follow what he called a national yoga. And we can take this as an image of the entire vision of India's rebirth. A national yoga for him meant at all levels. It meant at the spiritual level, the intellectual level, what he would call later the vital level or emotional level, and also the physical body of the nation. And this is something which he explained not in any systematic manner, but through his various writings, some of which I try to bring together in this book India's rebirth. The spiritual foundations are very clear, and we will see how he comes back to them right at the end of his life, and he reformulates them for India to follow after India achieved independence. But there are other aspects, very important ones, which I want to spend a few minutes on. One of them is this fact of national yoga. So he declared in 1911, in fact, it was in a letter to a friend, he said, spirituality is India's only politics. You see how he roots everything in spirituality. For him, and this is the central message, I think, if we have to remember one from Sri Aurobindo, that there cannot be a proper future for India in her mission, in her dharma, in her destiny, the fulfillment of her destiny, if these spiritual foundations are ignored or brushed aside. So this remained absolutely constant through all his declarations from his days in Baroda all the way to his passing in 1950. Spirituality is India's only politics. The fulfillment of the Sanatana Dharma, it's only Swaraj. I have no doubt we shall have to go through our parliamentary period in order to get rid of the notion of Western democracy by seeing in practice how helpless it is to make nations blessed. And this is something I'm coming back to in a minute. India is passing really through the first stages of a sort of national yoga. This was written in 1911, and he wanted this yoga to encompass all aspects of the body of the nation. Now, apart from the spiritual foundations, there is a very important aspect, which is the intellectual life. And again, he stressed the fact that India must develop her own intellectual foundations. And of course, there is the spiritual backdrop behind them, but then we do need to formulate things intellectually and to be able to educate the whole population in this vision. In 1920, he wrote to his brother, Barendra Kumar Ghosh, who was, of course, a well-known revolutionary himself, and who had been freed from the Andamans, where he had been jailed initially for life. He was released after an amnesty, came back to India and the Indian mainland, I mean, and was trying to find his own path. And Sri Aurobindo wrote to him a long letter of great importance. There is no time to go through it, but he wrote in particular, I believe that the main cause of India's weakness is not subjection, not poverty, not a lack of spirituality or dharma, but a diminution of thought power, the spread of ignorance in the motherland of knowledge. Everywhere I see an inability or unwillingness to think, incapacity of thought or thought phobia. And this is something which perhaps to some extent remains a question mark today in our intellectual life. So he wrote further, our first necessity if India is to survive and do her appointed work in the world is that the youth of India should learn to think. So this is a summary of his vision for Indian education, national education, you may say. To think on all subjects, to think independently. Today we call it critical thinking. And he wrote a very important series of articles on the importance of original thinking, which in themselves could help us design, a national education policy. To think on all subjects, to think independently, fruitfully, going to the heart of things, not stopped by their surface, free of prejudgments, shearing sophism and prejudice asunder, as with a sharp sword, smiting down obscurantism of all kinds as with the mace of India. And why does Sri Aurobindo use the word obscurantism? Because he said elsewhere that he considered that the mold of traditional India needed to be broken. In this, he departed from traditionalists and was sometimes severely criticized by them. He saw great value in Indian traditions, and especially in the core of India's spiritual and intellectual and, of course, artistic heritage. But he was not a blind worshipper of tradition per se, and he could see that often it became an obstacle to India's progress, which is why he says he is smiting down obscurantism of all kinds. We must begin by accepting nothing on trust from any source whatsoever, by questioning everything and forming our own conclusions. We need not fear that we shall, by that process, cease to be Indians or fall into the danger of abandoning Hinduism. India can never cease to be India or Hinduism to be Hinduism. If we really think for ourselves, it is only if we allow Europe to think for us that India is in danger of becoming an ill-executed and foolish copy of Europe. You can see the boldness and the prophetic nature of his thought. He said a little later that was still in the first decade of the century, of the last century, the Indian brain is still in potentiality what it was, but it is being damaged, stunted, and defaced. The greatness of its innate possibilities is hidden by the greatness of its surface deterioration. So this is, in very, very brief compass, how he saw the need for an intellectual rebirth. And the recapturing of India's ancient intellectual freedom and originality. Let us not forget, and this is something he stressed again and again, that India was once one of the great intellectual leaders of the world, and capable of constantly producing original thought in field after field. And this was no longer the case, of course, during the colonial period. So that degradation is something he witnessed at close quarters, and this is how he saw the way out. So now I want to spend a few last minutes on the rebirth of the body of India. If we continue this image of a national yoga. And first of all, the body politic, if I may say so. We already heard him say, you know, how he didn't want India to follow the path of Europe. And again, he said, you know, he attacked this notion of Western democracy as being the panacea and the unavoidable development that India should follow. So this is something he again and again rejected. He said, for example, I believe in something that might be called social democracy, but not in any of the forms now current, and not altogether in love with the European kind, however great it may be an improvement on the past. And the crucial statement follows, I hold that India, having a spirit of her own and a governing temperament proper to her own civilization, should in politics as in everything else, and not stumble in the wake of Europe. But this is precisely what she will be obliged to do if she has to start on the road in her present chaotic and unprepared condition of mind. This is 1920. See the prophetic vision and see how, in fact, independent India, and in a way he was not the only one. Swami Vivekananda also had called for a complete reshaping of India, and many of the freedom fighters, Tilak, Bipin Chandrapal, and Lajpat Rai and others had also called for a similar reshaping of India. But he was the one, I believe, who formulated to be done. Did India listen to those voices after independence? Is unfortunately something we cannot maintain. As a nation, we adopted after independence the British democratic system, the judicial system, the economic system, the educational system, to the point that some Indians started asking, why did we fight for? What was the point if we are simply continuing all this machinery without any radical change as those voices wanted to follow? And again, he said in a talk to disciples, the parliamentary form would hardly be suitable for our people. Of course, it is not necessary that we should today follow the same old forms as in ancient India, but you could take the line of evolution and follow the bent of the genius of the race. So this is what he wanted India to do, to understand how what forms had been evolved in the past and how they could be adapted to a present context. He said, for example, there may be one Rashtrapati at the top with considerable powers so as to secure a continuity of policy, and as an assembly representative of the nation, the provinces will combine into a federation united at the top, leaving ample scope to local bodies to make laws according to their local problems. We may say that this is the system we have today, but we know all too well that the system is not functioning satisfactorily. So there would be much more to develop in this line, but I want to close on two very important statements he made in two issues which we are still faced with. The first issue is what he called the communal problem, the communal issue. And you know very well that already during the freedom movement, the Hindu-Muslim problem in particular was getting sharper and sharper. It was not so sharp in 1905 during the partition of Bengal, which in a way triggered a new phase of intensity in the freedom movement. There was actually some show of unity initially. There are testimonies that Muslims and Hindus were together walking in the streets of Calcutta, chanting together Bande Mataram. Muslims too, yes, there are testimonies to that effect. And but then very soon, certain Muslim leaders were not happy and started their own movement in asserting the Muslim identity. And here Sri Aurobindo, with his usual frank language, not beating about the bush, spelled out the problem in the following terms. And you know that his vision of nationalism was an inclusive vision. He wanted all religions present in India to live amicably together and to work together for the greatness of the nation, not for the greatness of Hinduism or the greatness of Islam or any other religion, but for the nation together. But he identified the following problem. He said, in a discussion with disciples, he said, you can live amicably with a religion whose principle is toleration. But how is it possible to live peacefully with a religion whose principle is, I will not tolerate you? And he's, of course, here pointing to radical Muslim leaders. It was, of course, not the case of the entire Muslim population, but radical Muslim leaders who were having an exclusivist attitude. How are you going to have unity with these people? Certainly, Hindu-Muslim unity cannot be arrived at on the basis that the Muslims will go on converting Hindus while the Hindus shall not convert any Mohammedans. You cannot build unity on such a basis. Perhaps the only way of making the Mohammedans harmless is to make them lose their fanatic faith in their religion. And this is something that we are now hearing again today, this whole debate between a radical Islam and a moderate Islam. So the problem was posed already in these days. And finally, I want a set of problems which can be summed up in one word: secularism, because that is also intimately connected to the intercommunal harmony that Sri Aurobindo was striving for. And there we were told then and now that the solution to this intercommunal problem is secularism. Sri Aurobindo frankly disagreed, and he considered that this is not what will resolve these issues. He said early on that his idea of spirituality, I quote, has nothing to do with ascetic withdrawal or contempt or disgust of secular things. He said, there is nothing to me, there is to me nothing secular. All human activity is for me a thing to be included in a complete spiritual life. In other words, his vision is that of Hinduism. And he explained that Hinduism has always attached to social life, individual and collective life, a great importance. It has left out no part of life as a thing secular and foreign to the religious and spiritual life. So his emphasis is quite the opposite of secularism as we conceive it today, which says that, well, you have on the one hand religious or spiritual life, and then we have social life which should be completely divorced from it. And he said, no, Hinduism and the whole ancient evolution of India, on the contrary, was trying to harmonize the two sides, not to divorce them. So, this is the issue as he posed it, and his vision was that we should, on the contrary, use this key that India gave to the whole evolution of the country, that we have to use those spiritual foundations and values without which we will not be able to harmonize and reconcile all the diverse elements that go into the making of this nation. Finally, let me close on some of the fundamental declarations he made on this great thread and continuity of Indian culture and Indian spiritual values that he saw as central to a reborn India, post-independent India, if you wish. One he expressed in 1915 itself, and it was, I believe, in an interview to a journalist from the Hindu News Daily. And he said, our past, with all its faults and defects, should be sacred to us. But the claims of our future, with its immediate... So you can see that he was not blindly attached to the past. Once again, for him, there was nothing sacrosanct about the past. He was ready to depart from it, at the same time without discarding the central values that it had evolved. And in 1948, so after independence, and when he was given some award by the Andhra University, he sent a message. He could not go and accept the award in person. And the central part of his message to me, of this 1948 message, 1 year after Indian independence, is the following, and I will close on these words. It would be a tragic irony of fate if India were to throw away her spiritual heritage at the very moment when in the rest of the world there is more and more a turning towards her for spiritual help and a saving light. This must not and will surely not happen, but it cannot be said that the danger is not there. So he saw India in need of tapping the best of that spiritual heritage, not only for her own rebirth, but ultimately for the rebirth of the world. And this was, after Second World War, and he could still see a lot of dark clouds on the world and the whole direction of world civilization as being fraught with danger. And in this picture, he saw India as having a mission to provide, as he said, spiritual help and a saving light. Have we fulfilled that mission? Have we 75 years later, can we say that we have progressed on that path? I will leave the question open for all of you to answer. This is the briefest possible summary I could give of India's vision for India's rebirth, and I thank you all for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Danino, for this very insightful lecture of yours, taking us through the holistic life of Sri Aurobindo and covering up multiple aspects of his life, which are still pertinent, especially the 4 pillars that you recently mentioned about Swaraj, Swadeshi, boycott, and the national education. It seems as if we are still, it's a full circle, we are still there. Now I would request Dr. Sampadananda Mishra to moderate not only the questions, but also to place his insights, because presently while he is in Pondicherry, though he's now based out of Sonipat, but in his previous role at the Auroville, at the ashram, he's today at Pondicherry, the place which is the Karm Bhumi for Sri Aurobindo. I would request him to moderate and also share some more insights on Sri Aurobindo's life. Dr. Mishra.
Namaskar to all of you, and thank you, Mohit and Parthasarathi ji and Manoj ji for being present, and this opportunity is being created, and Professor Michel Danino ji, such a beautiful, concise presentation, starting from Sri Aurobindo's birth till how he contributed towards the nationalism, and the important points which you mentioned about that national yoga finding her own intellectual and spiritual foundation, and what you read out about, like Barin's letter to Sri Aurobindo's letter to Barin, saying that it is not the material poverty or spiritual poverty, but what lacks is that original thought power which the youth needs to revive. These are the central important messages of Sri Aurobindo when we talk about nationalism, when we talk about revival of the India's cultural heritage, tradition, the spirituality, and indeed spirituality is the key throughout. And what we see, like what Sri Aurobindo was doing and did, is very, very central to his life itself, his work itself. The messages themselves are very, very central to India's rebirth. But there are 2 problems, as we always see: this problem of uniformization, like bringing the uniformity, not focusing on the unity as he has always spoken about. The second tendency of glorifying the past, and by rebirth, many people think that it is a return to the past. So that on that I would like you to focus that what exactly Sri Aurobindo's message. Of course, we all those who have read Sri Aurobindo are familiar with what he has said, but I would like to listen from you what exactly in Sri Aurobindo's light, or when we read his writings, what is rebirth of India meant.
Thank you, Dr. Sampadananda ji. I think these 2 points which you very rightly highlight are not difficult to deal with in terms of Sri Aurobindo's vision. The first, you say the problem of uniformity. I don't think anybody in his right sense would want uniformity in India, because it's impossible. India is so diverse and has thrived in diversity, has encouraged diversity. This whole concept of Swabhava and Swadharma is the root of India's diversity, that everybody has, his or her own nature and his or her own path. And therefore, there's no question of imposing uniformity on India. But at the same time, there are certain commonly shared deep spiritual roots, which at least is what Sri Aurobindo and others asserted. And if these are well understood, they will lead to a value system which is not coercive, which is not dogmatic, which doesn't seek to impose anything on anyone, but brings out the very best in human nature, and should in fact even lead to a transformation of human nature as his ultimate vision. So it is not uniformity. It is certainly, what I think Rabindranath Tagore called the many in the one, or is it Sri Aurobindo? I am a bit confused, but or both of them. It is acknowledging this oneness, that we all come from the same tree, we share the same roots, we have the same trunk, but we are all, distinct branches, distinct leaves, if you like, perhaps, of the tree, and we are all different. And there's no two leaves of one tree are identical, they are different. But we should acknowledge these common roots. If we deny the roots, then, of course, we will have nothing to hold this nation together. So I think the first point is not hard to understand. As far as glorifying the past is concerned, Sri Aurobindo clearly said somewhere that, it is not that we have to go back to the bullock cart, we do not have to go back to Aryabhata, if I remember right, something like this. So he never advocated a return to the past, but he did advocate understanding the past of India deeply and to understand what he called the genius of the race. Today, the word race is a little bit obsolete. Let us say, the genius of India, the genius of this nation, its own swabhava, its own nature, understanding it in depth, because that can still formulate new solutions to problems, whether today or tomorrow. So he certainly said, and in that interview to the journalist of the Hindu in 1915, when he had already, he had taken retirement, he had taken refuge in Pondicherry, he said, the key to our problems today are in India's past. But it's not as if we can blindly take some past formula and stick to it as if traditions are valid for all time. He did say we have to break the mold so that the spirit can live. So we should not be attached to the mold of ancient India, but the ancient spirit can still help us to formulate new frameworks for today's body of the nation. I think there again he was extremely clear.
Yeah, true. I think the essential spirit, which he again and again points out, that the true nationalism or true rebirth will be to be more and more conscious of what is, what was, what is, and what will be the essential spirit of this nation, and which constitutes the uniqueness of this nation and can never be destroyed. And also, like, he has this poem in Sanskrit called the Bhavani Bharati. So there also he has a very beautiful line where he says, Matasmi bhu putraka bharatanam sanatananam tridasha priyanam shakto nayan putra vidhir vipaksha kalopi no nashaitum yamova. So there is not even the god of death has the power, not even the Mahakala, the time spirit, has the power to destroy this uniqueness. And especially one more question I would like to ask you and then elaborate on it. Like, when we look at the whole history of India's spiritual heritage or cultural heritage, the different ages, as Sri Aurobindo points out, the discovery of the spirit, and then the discovery of the dharma, the formulation of shastra, and then the birth of many regional languages and the bhakti movement. These are the four major periods he points out. And then again, the past of India has to be treated as a foundation, as a springboard to leap towards the bright future. And India's national development, has a lot to contribute towards the world's development. So somewhere he says that India has not yet spoken her last word. So it has a lot to do for the welfare of the whole world. So now, this being the point, today we see a lot of perversion, lot of meanness, especially in the youth of India, when we speak about India's rebirth or nationalism, so how do we revive this, what Sri Aurobindo pointed out, that what we lost, that original thought power, and then spread this message, this important message of Sri Aurobindo, what is very, very central to India's growth or national development. So how do we inspire the youth of India? What will be your take on this?
You know, there is that old saying that when you read newspapers, you get only the bad news. You don't get the good news. Good news is no news. So I think we should not overemphasize the dark aspects. Yes, there is darkness in India, plenty, in the world, plenty, but there's also an awakening, which is also triggered by the intensity of the circumstances. We are living in an increasingly ominous world, unstable world, difficult world, and you know, young people are very aware of that, and many of them are anguished at what the future holds for them, because they can see that we have messed up with the planet at the level of the climate and the environment. It's extremely visible. Look at Athens today, you know, the seat of Europe, the symbol of Athens as the seat of European culture and almost the engine of the European Renaissance, and Athens being threatened by the fire, by the forest fires all around it. It is so symbolic. We can see this whole civilization, you know, on the edge of the precipice, and nobody knows, of course, what's going to happen. And I'm not trying to prophesy in any way, but I think young Indians are are questioning themselves, and of course, some of them are just after a good job and a good paycheck and that. But you know, among 600 million young Indians, there are quite a lot who are really in quest, in search, and they will find answers in their own way, because once again, it's not about dictating answers. It's only about inviting them to explore, to question, and I'm confident, because I happen to teach, I happen to be in touch with you know, Indian students in an IIT, but occasionally otherwise also. And I can see that this, you know, this fine Indian substance, which is still there behind, if you scratch the surface, it is still there. And it can manifest in unexpected ways. And I can see a lot of young Indians taking initiatives and, you know, questioning all this direction which independent India has followed, not trying to reject it. I mean, there are good things that, of course, independent India achieved, but as you know, as if saying it's not enough. It's not enough to secure the future. We have to innovate. We have to be much bolder. We have to question. We have to sometimes maybe, you know, break some frameworks that are, you know, imprisoning these energies. So I'm not at all pessimistic in the long term. I'm only pessimistic in the short term.
Good. Thank you. So there are two questions. Like, one question is, there is a student, Deepti, so from Hyderabad. So she has posted this question, that Sri Aurobindo formulated the concept of supermind as a kind of intermediary power between manifest and unmanifest Brahman. So then she puts this question: how do we tap onto the powers of supermind and evolve as a supramental race?
I honestly do not think it is for me to answer this question, because Sri Aurobindo has written at great length on this. You know, this is his whole path of discovery, his whole yoga. And I think, Deepti, that you have to read him. I do not consider myself qualified to sum up his philosophy. Of course, it is a philosophy of evolution. The key word is evolution. The key word is that, you know, he sees this whole universe as a field of manifestation of higher and higher consciousness. So you know, right now we've had the mental phase of the manifestation, but it has to move beyond, and it has to move beyond into those spiritual powers which he called supramental, that will manifest and completely change the whole definition of our evolution. But this is something which I think you should read in his own words. You know, he wrote this Life Divine, he wrote the Synthesis of Yoga at a slightly more practical level of what different paths are offered to us. This is his whole work, and perhaps his whole legacy, his central, essential legacy for the future, more than his vision of the past and his vision for India. Perhaps his central message is still unknown, is still unmanifest, and the work he did, the yoga he did, is something that perhaps we will discover in the future ages. So I would not like to say more. You will find your own answer in his words.
There is one more question from Dinesh Ji, Mumbai. So he says, what is your suggestion to raise awareness about Sri Aurobindo's teachings in general public, especially in children?
In children, let us say in young Indians, I think that first of all, a simple way is to highlight properly Sri Aurobindo's role in the freedom movement. Because there are already a lot of seeds of the future Sri Aurobindo. They're not the same. Sri Aurobindo as a freedom fighter and Sri Aurobindo as a yogi, a philosopher, a revolutionary of consciousness, they are not exactly the same, but they are in continuity of each other. So I think that young Indians can much more easily relate to Sri Aurobindo, the revolutionary thinker during the freedom movement, because that part of his is still very poorly known. I have checked many of our history textbooks, and many do mention his name, but only in passing. And even some of the old history textbooks mention him as an extremist. There is even one textbook which was written, I think, by Arjun, what was his name? Anyway, who mentioned him as a terrorist. We are still using sometimes the word terrorist, which was used by the British colonial authority to depict such freedom fighters, which is very shameful. So first of all, I think we should set him in proper context and show his role in depth and the role of all his fellow freedom fighters. This can inspire young Indians, and then, you know, his vision for the future India. And this is what I tried to do in that book, precisely. In this book, Sri Aurobindo and India's Rebirth, I did not attempt to spell out his philosophy, to describe his yoga, I did not try to do any of that. I tried to remain focused on his vision of the nation. I think, Dinesh, that this is what young Indians can understand. And whether they want to go beyond is up to them. That is all.
Yeah. Dhanyavad. Yes. I think the vision of India, that Sri Aurobindo, the future, so is very nicely put in his 5 dreams, that the free and united India, the resurgence of Asia and her role, world union, spiritual gift of India to the world, and individual perfection and perfect society. And also, like in the context of rebirth of India, the immediate task that he speaks about, like though we keep repeating this message, which is very, very central to it, that the first task is to recover the spiritual wisdom. And then percolation of that spiritual wisdom into various realms of life, and making that as the foundation. What is important is the creation of new forms of literature, new forms of religion, new forms of philosophy, new forms of art, architecture, So which is important. And then again, based on that foundation, so how do we create a spiritualized society where that individual perfectibility and the collective perfectibility takes place harmoniously. So these are the things which are very, very central to Sri Aurobindo's vision of rebirth of India.
Yes, but we should add Sampadananda ji, that he was very, he was not a dreamer. Sri Aurobindo was not a dreamer. And when we say a harmonious spiritualized society, at the same time, he knew very well that human nature, as it is now, will not create that society. It cannot. It cannot, because he even said at some point, he spoke of the this hopelessly asuric humanity, right? So you will remember this also. So he was not blind to the fact that it is only if human nature changes and in its deep roots that this spiritualized society will happen, not otherwise. Today it is something still far ahead. So we will see what the future holds in its womb, and we will see also, what kind of circumstances will ultimately perhaps compel us to change. And this is perhaps the whole meaning of this negativity that we see in the world, and these dangerous developments everywhere. That this is perhaps what we need, fortunately or unfortunately, to compel us to operate that change.
Yeah, true. And so that's why right in the beginning, when you were speaking about the vision, you also mentioned that it will take time for its realization. And what should we do during that time is a preparation. So that's why, like the mother said that a new world is born. Will you collaborate? So that collaboration is a great preparation from our side to facilitate the transformation which is needed for the change to come. So I think with this note,
thank you
again. Dhanyavad.
Thank you, Sampadananda ji.
Thank you very much, Sampaji. Thank you very much, Professor Danino, for this very, very insightful conversation. And while I have taken my notes, especially the 4 pillars, but something that we recently heard from Sampaji in one of his Sanskrit classes that we go through, he spoke about swasth, and he spoke about how winning yourself and your self-awareness is what the central theme. And as Sri Aurobindo said, I would like to read it from your edited notes itself. For it is in the spirit that strength is eternal, and you must win back the kingdom of yourselves, the inner Swaraj, before you can win back your outer empire. Recover the source of all strength in yourself, and all else will be added to you. Social soundness, intellectual preeminence, political freedom, the mastery of human thoughts, the hegemony of the world. Can't be a better day than this to celebrate the India's gold. That too with such remarkable discussion on the life of Sri Aurobindo, who always dreamt of Swaraj, the real Swaraj, which actually comes from our inner self. With this, I would now request Sri Manoj Dehuriji, Director, Central Secretariat Library, to convey his word of thanks. My special thanks to him for giving us this opportunity for this beautiful collaboration. What Dr. Sampadananda Mishra just mentioned, that these are the kind of words that we will have to bring together to bring out such heroes, and also what Professor Danino just mentioned, that he has been mentioned as a terrorist in many of the books. How can we rewrite of what we know, of we don't know? So with that, Sri Manoj Dehuriji, I request you for your special word of thanks to all of us who could join in today, please.
Thank you very much. And I, on behalf of Government of India, Ministry of Culture, Central Secretariat Library, I'm very thankful that Professor Danino has spared his valuable time, giving us a very, a thought-provoking lecture, giving insight into Sri Aurobindo's emphasis on spiritual heritage, which is very relevant to the present situation. And I would like that such kind of interactions are held regularly with him, so that today's younger generation gets insight into what Sri Aurobindo taught of spirituality and its relevance today. I'm very thankful that Professor Danino has spared time for Central Secretariat Library and making this Meet the Author event a very successful one. Thank you very much, sir. Namaskar.
Thank you very much, sir, for your kind words. I would now yet again say thanks not only to Professor Michel Danino, Dr. Sampadananda Mishra for moderating it, to you, sir, Manoji, the entire team of Central Secretariat Library, Sri Parthasarthi Sen Sharma, who with a lot of meticulousness and curiosity, he was sending some notes as well, and he has taken some more notes to Mr. Rao, to Mr. Bisht, to Mr. Goswami, and to everyone who could tune in for this lovely conversation and to take this ahead and celebrate the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, which is the 75th year of celebration. We will bring you more of such conversations very soon. It's truly a pleasure. We will see you very soon for more such discussions. Thank you very much. Have a blessed Sunday. Have a great life. Namaskar. Jai Hind.